2020 saw a record number of weather events like hurricanes, wildfires, ice glaciers melting. And as the list goes on, it all raises more concern about climate change. This week, the World Meteorological Organization, a United Nations agency, released its climate report. And as we told you yesterday, what's in it is not good. Scientists say this year is on track to be one of the 3 warmest on record. This past decade is the warmest, and the 6th hottest years on record have all happened since 2015. Joining us now from San Francisco to talk more about this report is the Executive Director of Covering Climate Now, Mark Hertsgaard. Mark, welcome. Great to have you with us. So what are the most concerning findings in this report?
This is all things that the world scientists have been saying for a very long time. So in a way, the most concerning thing is just how little so many of the world's governments have paid attention to these warnings. We've known for 20 plus years that carbon dioxide stays in the atmosphere after it's released. And that's why these years keep getting hotter because of all of the past emissions. And so the fact that it's not at all surprising to science that 6 of the last years have been the hottest on record. It's not at all surprising to scientists that we saw record hurricanes, that we saw the ghastly wildfires that destroyed Australia a year ago. Here in California, where I live, in October gave us those apocalyptic orange skies. So unfortunately, this is all stuff that has been widely expected, and the WMO report just confirms what science has been saying for quite a while now.
So why do you think there's such a disconnect between what the science tells us and what scientists know and have been saying for quite a while now, as you point out, and what governments around the world seem to be accepting and acting on? Is it because there is this misconception that fighting climate change, is not good for their economies? Why do you think there's such a wide disconnect?
Well, we have to be honest here in the United States that the outgoing Trump administration is a big part of the problem. For 4 years now, we have been thumbing our nose at this scientific consensus, calling it a hoax, saying that we don't have to do this, that what really matters is getting U.S. energy production up of fossil fuels, destroying all of the regulations that the Environmental Protection Agency and others put forward. This is the 50th anniversary this week of the EPA. One of the most important, really, on a world level. The EPA has led historically with regulations, and the United States has led with laws like the Clean Air Act, the Clean Water Act, the Endangered Species Act. So a lot of this falls at the feet of the Trump administration. And the good news, though, is that as we reported as Covering Climate Now and in partnership with CBS News reported earlier this week, that now governments are turning around, and in a rather remarkable diplomatic achievement that has not gotten the attention it deserves. The UN Secretary General, Antonio Guterres, has organized this coalition of so-called net zero emissions by 2050. So all of the big emitters, China in particular, but Japan, the European Union, and under the incoming Biden administration, the United States, are now committing to essentially phase out our use of fossil fuels by the middle of the century. That's only 30 years from now, and that's a huge, huge shift. But if we do that, and if all the countries that have promised to do that actually follow through with real policies that deliver that result, then we actually could keep the temperature rise almost to the Paris Agreement numbers, which is Paris Agreement calls for 1.5 degrees to 2.0. These new pledges take us to 2.1. So not all the way that we need to go, but much closer than where we're heading at the moment.
Well, when you lay it out like that, it is reassuring, but is it too little too late? Because what kind of timeline is the report laying out in terms of damage reaching the point of no return?
That is a question that the scientists have been working hard on, and it's very hard to know where you reach that irreversible point where, no, we can't come back. And look, let's be honest, for a lot of people, that point has already been passed. If you lost your home in the wildfires, or in Australia, where we lost over 1 billion animals, 1 billion animals were killed in those fires back in January of 2020. It's already too late for them. It's already too late for a lot of the people living in some of the most vulnerable areas of the world because we didn't listen sooner to what the science says. However, it's never too late to make a difference. And when there is still time, this is what the scientists tell us, if we get our act in order quickly, and in order to meet those targets by 2050, the real question is what we do in the next 10 years and even the next 4 to 5 years. Because if we don't get the emissions down by about half within 10 years, it simply won't be physically possible to hit the mid-century target of getting rid of fossil fuels entirely.
And Mark, as you mentioned earlier, the release of this report kicked off the UN's push for more climate change action, with UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres saying the fight against climate crisis is a top global priority. What exactly is the UN calling for world leaders to do in order to change the path we're on?
Well, there's going to be, we're in the middle of this 10-day push that the Secretary General is making around basically strengthening the Paris Accord. And as I said earlier, he's now done really an amazing bit of diplomacy to get all of these big emitters to say, okay, yes, we're going to hit that 2050 target. We're going to basically get off of fossil fuels by 2050. But there's obviously a big difference between us promising something and actually delivering something. And that's what the Secretary General is now pushing for. On December 12th, which is next week, that is the 5th anniversary of the signing of the Paris Accord 5 years ago. He is convening a summit with Boris Johnson, the UK Prime Minister, will be hosting the follow-up conference to Paris next year. And at that December 12th summit, they're going to be saying, okay, now that you've made these pledges, show us the money, basically, which is what are the financial commitments that you're going to make in the private sector as well, by the way. But governments, show us what you're going to spend. For example, the Biden administration has been saying, we want to spend $2 trillion to create a lot of jobs along the way of getting America off of fossil fuels. And I think the Secretary General is going to say, okay, well, show us how that pencils out. Where will the money come from? And then, of course, the big question will be, what will the new Congress say about Mr. Biden's plans?
That's good to know that the Secretary General, though, is asking for some concrete proof, sort of show me the money, as it were. What is your plan? That's reassuring. Well, Mark Hertsgaard, thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate it.
Always a pleasure.